Hour 13. Hive Galather burns. The smoke doesn't rise anymore, there's too much of it. It clings to the ceilings of the upper levels like a living thing, rolling down the Ferrocrete corridors, smothering the light from the lumen strips until everything turns into a smear of orange and ash. You can't see the sun. You can't see the stars. Only the faint red blink of emergency beacons and the dying screams of a city built to house 1 billion souls. Corporal Rincorda of the 9th Harvian Infantry breathes through a torn rebreather. Each breath tastes of copper and burning oil. His hands are blistered from the heat of his lasgun's power pack, and the Auspex display on his wrist has been flashing signal lost for the past 3 hours. He doesn't know how many of his regiment are still alive. He only knows that the Vox said hold the lower gates at all costs, and the lower gates are long gone. He wipes grime from his face with a trembling hand, pushing himself against the sandbag wall of what used to be a Hab district. Now it's a trench of shattered plascrete, rubble piled higher than a man, lit by the flames of burning manufactorums beyond the walls. Corporal Corda, someone rasps beside him. It's Sergeant Vale, face half hidden behind a bloodied bandage. Command says the enemy broke through subsector 12. Corda swallows hard. That's the last containment line. Vale nods grimly. Then we hold what's left. The ground shakes, not from artillery that ended hours ago. This is closer, heavier. A grinding, monstrous sound that feels like it's coming from beneath the streets. The cracks widen in the Ferrocrete floor. They're tunneling again, Corda mutters. Vale spits into the dust. Emperor, help us. The sound of tunneling has haunted them for days. Genestealer cults digging through the underhive, breaking through walls, sewers, even ventilation shafts. It's not a siege anymore. It's an infestation. You can't tell where they'll come from next. Somewhere in the darkness below, a low screech echoes through the smoke, then another, then dozens. The sergeant barks, guns ready. Rin grips his lasgun tight, finger trembling over the trigger. The men beside him, maybe 12 total, look like ghosts in the half-light, uniforms blackened with soot and blood. They've been fighting for 36 hours straight, ever since the upper hives fell. Then the floor erupts. A mass of claws and teeth bursts through the rubble. A genestealer, its purple carapace slick with grime, slashes through the first man before he can scream. The second dies with a bayonet half driven into the creature's chest. Bolter rounds crack through the air, not from Astartes, but from the PDF remnants holding the line somewhere down the street. The squad fires in unison. Lasfair turns the air into a strobe of red. The first wave of creatures goes down in shrieking heaps, but more crawl out of the holes, dozens now, then hundreds, a living tide of chitin and rage. Vale roars over the din. Fall back to Junction 12, move. Corda grabs the arm of a young trooper beside him, pulling him up from the rubble. The boy can't be more than 16, his flak armor 3 sizes too large. He doesn't even have a name tag anymore. Run, Corda shouts, but his voice is lost in the storm. They scramble through the ruins, the shrieks of the Xenos echoing behind them. A heavy demolition charge detonates somewhere to their right, lighting up the smoke like a sun. The shockwave hurls Corda against a wall, his head ringing, ears bleeding. When he opens his eyes, half the street is gone. He crawls over shattered glass and broken bodies until he finds the sergeant again. Vale's leg is pinned under a girder. He's still conscious, breathing hard, blood dripping from his lips. Go, Vale croaks. I'll slow you down. Not leaving you, Corda grits out, trying to lift the girder. It doesn't budge. Vale grips his shoulder with surprising strength. You've got 13 hours, Corporal. Make them count. Then the sergeant shoves him backward and pulls the pin on his last frag grenade. Corda stumbles away, shielding his head as the explosion tears through the debris. When the dust settles, there's nothing left but smoke. He staggers into the next corridor, half-blind, half-deaf, weapon clutched like a lifeline. The vox crackles faintly again. A female voice, calm, distant, mechanical, cuts through the static. All surviving Imperial forces, this is Command Station Delta. Defensive fallback in effect. Rendezvous at Silo Bastion 3. Repeat, Silo Bastion 3. Corda slams his vox bead. This is Corporal Rin Corda of Harvian 9th, Sector 12 collapsed. I repeat, collapsed. We're cut off, how copy? Static. Then a single phrase, faint as a ghost. If you can't reach Bastion 3, hold out. Evac arrives in 13 hours. 13 hours. Corda looks around at the burning wreckage. There's no air support, no reinforcements, no command structure left in the lower hive. Just a handful of scattered survivors, pockets of resistance swallowed by a living nightmare. He looks up. Somewhere above the ceiling, through layers of ash and ruin, orbital bombardments light the sky. Maybe the Navy's still out there. Maybe. He wipes the blood from his mouth and starts walking. Hour 12. Corda finds the survivors. They're huddled in what used to be a transit station. 20, maybe 30 souls. A mix of guardsmen, PDF troops, and civilians. Some carry lasguns, others improvise spears. All of them have the same hollow look in their eyes. The one who steps forward wears a torn commissar's coat over scorched flak armor. Her nameplate reads Lyra Voss. Her right arm is missing from the elbow down. You with the Harvian 9th? She asks. Corda nods, saluting weakly. What's left of it? She gestures to a map projected on a cracked data slate. Command's dead. Vox networks down. The cult has the underhive and most of the central levels. We're trapped between them and the ash wastes. What's the plan? Survive 13 hours, she says grimly. Then the Navy hits orbital fire support. Anyone still alive by then gets extracted. A murmur runs through the survivors, fear, disbelief, despair. Corda feels it too, but he forces himself to stay still. Voss continues. We've set perimeter charges around the station. It's our last strongpoint before Bastion 3. If we hold it until dawn, the fleet will burn the infestation out of Galather. Corda looks at the faces around him. Men and women too tired to stand straight, hands trembling as they reload charge packs. He realizes that for most of them, dawn will never come. He takes a lasgun from a fallen soldier and checks the pack. Half charge, enough for maybe 20 shots. Then we make them bleed, he mutters. Hour 11. The lights go out. The station falls into darkness as the power grid fails. The only illumination comes from the occasional muzzle flash and the flickering light of burning oil. Screeches echo through the tunnels. The enemy is close. He can hear their claws on the steel. Voss orders her troops to hold fire until visual contact. Then the walls burst open. A wave of hybrid soldiers, part human, part Genestealer, surges through the breach. They wear tattered uniforms of the local workers' guilds, their faces twisted into inhuman snarls. Corda fires until his weapon overheats. He doesn't think anymore. He just reacts, aim, squeeze, reload, repeat. The hybrids fall in heaps, but more take their place. Voss shouts orders from the rear, rallying the defense. Keep the line, don't break. A civilian beside Corda drops, his throat ripped open. Another detonates a Prometheum tank, engulfing the tunnel in fire. The blast sends molten metal spraying in all directions. The creatures shriek, some burn, some leap through the flames, still alive, still killing. The line buckles. Voss grabs a Vox caster, yelling for backup, but the signal's dead again. She throws it aside, draws her bolt pistol with her remaining hand, and joins the line. Every shot she fires explodes a skull. Corda finds himself beside her, back to back. How many charges left? She asks. 3. Save one for yourself, she says. Then the tunnel ceiling collapses. Hour 10. Silence. Corda wakes under rubble, ears ringing. He's alive, barely. His armor's cracked, one leg twisted painfully. He drags himself out of the wreckage, coughing dust. The station is gone. The floor is a pit of molten metal, bodies half buried in the debris. He can't see Voss. He limps through the ruin, using his lasgun as a crutch. The Vox is dead again. The air tastes of ozone and blood. Then he hears it, faint voices. He follows the sound through a maintenance hatch into an auxiliary tunnel. A handful of survivors are there, covered in soot and horror. Among them, to his surprise, is Voss, burned, bleeding, but alive. "You're hard to kill," Corda mutters. "So I've been told," she says weakly. They regroup, 6 of them left. No medikey, no supplies. The orbital strike is still 10 hours away. They can't stay here. The heat from the reactor fires is spreading. The tunnels are collapsing. Corda takes point. "We head for the surface access. If we can reach Bastion 3, maybe they'll pick up our signal." Voss nods, "Move out." They vanish into the dark, unaware that the cult is already hunting them, and that something worse than Genestealers waits deeper in the Hive. Hour 9. The tunnels breathe. That's what it feels like. The deeper they go, the more the air seems to move, slow, rhythmic, like the lungs of some ancient beast buried beneath Hive Galather. The walls drip with condensation that smells faintly of rust and rot. Power lines snake along the ceiling, their insulation melted, sparking faintly in the gloom. The rebreathers whine, filters choking on dust and the stench of decay. Corporal Rincorda leads the column, one hand steady on his lasgun, the other clutching a dim auspex. The signal display flickers in and out, showing faint heat signatures ahead, some human, most not. Behind him comes Commissar Lyra Voss, her steps slow but deliberate despite the blood loss. She carries her bolt pistol in her remaining hand, the stump of her right arm bound in torn cloth. The other 4 survivors follow close, Trooper Yen wiry and jittering, Marlowe an old PDF sergeant with one eye gone, Sister Emmeline, her once white robes now brown with soot, and a young civilian, Taro, who never stops clutching a tiny, rusted Aquila medallion. They move in silence, broken only by the distant echoes of metal shifting above them or below. No one knows where the Hive begins or ends anymore. The bombardments have collapsed entire sectors, fusing streets into caverns and corridors into graves. Corda keeps the auspex pointed ahead. The faint green blips flicker and die. He frowns. They're moving. Voss doesn't look up. How many? Too many. The group halts. The tunnel splits ahead. One path descends into total darkness. The other slopes upward toward faint red light. The hum of machinery drifts from below, mixed with the whispering sound of skittering claws. Marlowe spits. Under Hive roots. The cult owns those. We go up. No, Corda says. Up leads towards Sector 10. That's the Manufactorum belt. Reactor fires are still spreading through it. Sister Emmeline speaks softly, her voice calm but hoarse. If we go up, we burn. If we go down, we die screaming. Voss narrows her eyes. Then we go where they least expect us, down. Marlowe stares at her. You serious? Every cultist in this Hive expects us to run for higher ground. We move where they don't look. She glances at Corda. Corporal, you're on point. Corda hesitates only a moment before nodding. He turns his helmet lamp on low beam and descends into the black. Hour 8. The sound grows louder, wet, organic. The tunnel widens into an old magrail maintenance shaft, long since abandoned. Fungal growths pulse on the walls, pale and veined, spreading across the steel like veins of diseased flesh. Every few steps, one of them bursts, releasing a cloud of spores that glows faintly blue. The air feels thicker with every breath. Yen mutters, this ain't right, nothing grows like this. Emmeline crosses herself. The corruption of Xenos is insidious. It eats the world from beneath. Corda tightens his grip on his weapon. Then we burn it if we have to. A faint light gleams ahead, not fire, but a cold, purple shimmer. As they draw closer, they find a chamber carved out of the tunnel, its walls slick with resin-like material. Dozens of cocoons hang from the ceiling, each containing a shape, some human, some long unrecognizable. The smell is unbearable. Taro stumbles backward, gagging. "Emperor, help!" Quiet, Voss snaps, "If they hear us." But it's too late. One of the cocoons twitches, then another, then all of them. The chamber erupts into chaos as the first hybrid tears free, half its face human, half monstrous, eyes glowing with alien fire. Corda fires a shot straight through its chest, but more are coming, clawing their way out of the walls. "Move!" Voss roars, firing her bolt pistol into the ceiling. The explosion showers debris onto the creatures as the squad retreats back through the shaft. Corda feels something seize his ankle. He kicks hard, ripping free just as a claw rakes across his boot. He fires again, the last bolt burning through the thing's arm. They reach a junction, turn left and stop dead. The tunnel ahead isn't metal anymore. It's resin, black and glistening, formed into strange arches that pulse faintly like veins. The floor is alive, shifting, crawling with tiny organisms that scatter when the light hits them. "This isn't the Underhive," Millennium whispers. "This is a nest." Voss's eyes narrow. "Then we're in their heart." Corda breathes hard, chest burning. "We can't go back, they're right behind us." Then forward it is. Hour 7. The Hive tunnels of the Genestealers stretch for kilometers. The deeper they go, the more the walls twist, turning industrial corridors into something organic, obscene. The light from Corda's lamp fades in the thick mist. Shadows ripple just out of sight. Every so often, a scream echoes from somewhere ahead, human, desperate. But when they run toward it, they find nothing but bones. They rest once, crouched in a narrow alcove. Voss checks her weapon, only 4 rounds left. Corda's laspec is almost drained. Marlowe's auto gun is jammed beyond repair. "We're nearly out of everything," Corda mutters, "even water." Voss looks at him, "Then we run on faith." He doesn't answer. He hasn't prayed in years, not since the first bombardment. But Sister Ameline hears her, and she begins to whisper a litany. Her voice echoes softly in the alien tunnels. "The Emperor is our shield, the Emperor is our fire. In his light we shall not falter." The others fall silent. For a moment, even the Hive seems to quiet. Then the silence breaks. A deep, resonant sound, not from the tunnels, but from somewhere far below. A low vibration that shakes the resin under their boots. The cocoons hanging from the ceiling begin to twitch. The air pressure changes. Marlowe raises his weapon. "What is that?" Corda's eyes widen. "Something big." A roar echoes through the chamber. Not the shriek of a Genestealer, but a bellow of something heavier, more primal. Then they see it. A creature emerges from the dark, enormous, hunched, armored in ridged plates of bone. Its claws scrape the floor, leaving gouges in the resin. Its eyes burn like molten gold. A Puristrain patriarch. "Run!" Voss shouts. The squad scatters as the monster charges, smashing through walls like paper. Lasfire splashes uselessly across its armor. Voss fires her remaining rounds, the explosions barely slowing it. Corda grabs Taro, dragging him through a maintenance breach. The patriarch roars again, hurling debris after them. A single shard of bone pierces Yen's chest. He falls without a sound. They crawl through the breach, into a maze of pipes and heat ducts. The creature's claws tear through the walls behind them. Every second feels like the last. Marlowe turns, shouting, "I'll hold it." Before Corda can stop him, Marlowe drops his pack and pulls the pin on a cracked grenade. The explosion shakes the tunnel, collapsing the breach. The sound of the patriarch's rage echoes behind the rubble, muffled but not gone. Corda lies on his back, gasping. His ears ring. Beside him, Taro sobs quietly. Voss sits up slowly, her face streaked with blood and soot. He bought us a few minutes. Let's move before it digs through. Hour 6. They emerge into what looks like an old maintenance substation, a forgotten corner of the Hive, where rusted machinery hums weakly, somehow still powered. The light here is faint green, flickering. Corda slumps against a bulkhead. We've lost too many. We need another plan. Voss crouches beside a cracked terminal, tapping at its screen with her remaining hand. If I can reach the old comm relay, we might ping Bastion 3's network. That's our only chance. Taro looks at her nervously. But the monster. It'll find us no matter where we go, she says. Now keep watch. Amelia kneels nearby, tending to what wounds she can. She wraps a fresh bandage around Corda's arm, murmuring a prayer under her breath. You carry guilt, she says softly, for every death. He doesn't answer. I've seen that look in every guardsman who survived too long. You can't save everyone, Corporal, but you can still save something. Before he can reply, the comm terminal flickers to life. Voss straightens. Signal found, weak but stable. Static fills the room, then a voice faint, distant, distorted. This is Bastion 3 command. Identify. Voss leans in. Commissar Lyra Voss, survivor of Harvey and 9th. Request immediate extraction coordinates. Negative. Extraction postponed. Hive-wide bombardment delayed due to enemy air dominance. Hold position until orbital approval. Corda's stomach drops. How long? ETA unknown. The line dies. Voss stares at the terminal for a long moment, then smashes it with her pistol butt. We're on our own, she says quietly. A sound echoes from the tunnel, scraping, heavy breathing. They've found us, Corda whispers. The survivors grab their weapons. The lights flicker again once, twice, then die completely. In the darkness, a single pair of golden eyes gleams. Hour 5. The battle is chaos. The Patriarch bursts through the wall in a storm of resin and dust. Its claws slice through steel. Voss fires her bolt pistol, each explosion lighting the chamber like lightning strikes. Move, she yells. Corda empties his lasgun into the creature's face, but it keeps coming. Its claws tear through the floor, its tail whipping through the air. Taro screams as he's thrown aside, crashing into a pile of machinery. Amelia rushes to drag him clear, shouting litanies of purity as sparks rain down. In his name, resist. Corda finds a discarded fuel canister near the generator stack. He shoots it. The explosion engulfs the Patriarch in flame, the blast throwing everyone off their feet. For a moment there's silence. Smoke fills the room. Then the creature moves again, slower, wounded but alive. Voss limps toward Corda. We can't kill it, we trap it. How? She points to the generator conduits overhead. Overload them. Corda climbs the console platform, slamming power levers up. The machine roars to life, sparks pouring from its vents. Amelia and Taro drag Voss toward the exit tunnel as the Patriarch charges again. Corda turns, staring into the monster's eyes as it leaps. He dives aside at the last second and fires into the conduit. The entire chamber erupts in blinding light. Electricity arcs across the walls. The Patriarch convulses, shrieking, caught in the storm of power. The blast tears through its body, leaving nothing but blackened husk and smoke. Corda collapses to his knees, half-deaf, chest burning. He staggers toward the others. Voss is barely conscious, her face pale. Amelia presses a hand to her pulse, still alive. Taro stares at the ruin behind them. Is it dead? Corda looks back once. The air still crackles with static. The smell of burnt flesh and resin fills the air. For now. He doesn't tell them that he saw something just before the explosion. The Patriarch's body splitting, birthing smaller shadows that fled into the cracks. The nest still lives. They have less than 5 hours left. Hour 4. The air tastes like burned copper. Corda can't tell if it's from the patriarch's corpse or the generator smoke, but every breath stings like acid. The tunnel ahead glows faintly red from the heat. Behind them, the airlock doors collapse under their own weight, the chamber they left behind sealed forever under molten slag. He pushes forward, half-dragging Commissar Voss by the shoulder strap. Her wounds are worse now, blood seeping through cracked armor, breathing shallow. Sister Emmeline walks close beside them, whispering quiet prayers between gasps. Taro follows last, carrying what little gear remains. His hands shake, but his eyes, once full of fear, now show something different, a brittle determination. They move through the cracked arteries of the Hive, passing what was once a civic transit tunnel. Train carriages hang in twisted shapes, their sides melted, passengers still strapped into seats as blackened husks. Every shadow looks alive in the flickering light. No one speaks until they reach a bulkhead gate half buried in debris. Its cogitator pad still glows faintly. Corda kneels to check it, brushing ash from the screen. Access lockdown, Bastion 3 perimeter gate. Authorized personnel only. He exhales sharply. We found it, Bastion 3's outer defense gate. Voss blinks, dazed. Then this is where they told us to hold. Emmeline nods weakly. The Emperor hasn't abandoned us yet. Corda tries to force the panel, but the system resists. The machine spirit is sluggish, damaged by heat and neglect. He reroutes power from an auxiliary conduit, sparks biting his gloves. The gate groans, metal slides, a crack of light appears. Then the sound of lasfire erupts from beyond the door. Down, Corda shouts, pulling Voss down just as a burst of energy scorches the wall above them. A voice calls out, harsh and paranoid, "Identify yourselves now." Corda shouts back, "Corporal Rin Corda, Harvian 9th, survivors inbound from Sector 12. There's a tense pause, then a reply, "Lower your weapons and step forward." The gate grinds open fully. On the other side stands a ragged line of Imperial soldiers behind makeshift barricades of sandbags and scrap metal. Floodlights burn overhead, blinding after the dark. The man who steps forward is massive, armor scorched, beard matted with grime. His insignia marks him as a lieutenant of the Cadian 44th. "By the throne," he mutters, "you actually made it through." Hour 3. The Bastion is a tomb that refuses to die. It was once an evacuation hub, reinforced ferrocrete walls, automated gun emplacements, stacked ammo crates. Now it's half-ruined, power flickering, corridors clogged with debris and wounded soldiers. The air smells of oil, sweat, and despair. Hundreds are here. Maybe 500 total, the remnants of regiments from half the Hive. Some still wear full armor, others are wrapped in rags, covered in blood. Medical servitors work silently, stitching, cauterizing, injecting morphix until their syringes run dry. Voss is carried to the medbay. Emmeline follows to assist, whispering prayers as the medics lay the commissar down. Corda stays behind with the lieutenant. The officer gestures toward a tactical map pinned to the wall. "I'm Lieutenant Garen Rusk, commanding what's left of this outpost. We're supposed to hold until orbital clearance. Been waiting 9 hours. No word from orbit, no resupply, no air." Corda studies the map. "You're boxed in on all sides." "Correct. The outer defenses collapsed at dawn. We sealed the inner gates an hour ago. There's something new out there, not just cultists. Bigger." Corda's eyes narrow, pure restraints. Rusk shakes his head. "Worse, bioforms we've never seen before, fast, smarter, they dig under the walls like worms." He walks to a viewport slit, gesturing toward the killing fields outside. In the crimson light of the burning Hive, movement ripples through the ash, shapes darting between craters, glimmers of carapace. They're testing us, Rusk says. They wait until our sentries blink, then they strike. Corda looks down. We killed a patriarch. Rusk's expression doesn't change. Then you've earned some rest. But Corda doesn't rest. He walks the perimeter walls, taking in every face, every trembling hand gripping a rifle. He sees fear everywhere, fear layered with exhaustion so deep it feels permanent. He feels it too. Hour 2. Night falls again, or maybe it's just the dust storms blotting out the light. In the command bunker, Corda sits across from Rusk, eating from a dented ration tin. The meat inside tastes like iron and chemicals, but he eats anyway. How many still capable of fighting? He asks. Rusk taps a data slate. 200 fit for duty. Another 100 wounded but able to hold a gun. We've got a dozen sentry turrets still functional. Power cells won't last through another night. And evac. No confirmation. Navy's still tied up in orbit. Corda frowns. Then why aren't they bombarding? Rusk sighs. Because the cult has shield generators. They've hijacked the macroreactors below the Hive. We can't get through the interference. Corda sets the tin aside. Then we go down and shut them off. Rusk stares at him, incredulous. Down there, you've seen what's below. Yes, which means I know the way. Rusk leans back. You're suggesting a suicide run. Corda's eyes harden. I'm suggesting we either die waiting or die doing something that matters. Before Rusk can reply, an alarm cuts through the bunker. The Vox operator shouts, "Motion, outer perimeter." They rush to the parapet. Through the gloom, dozens of blue flashes appear, eyes, claws, movement. The defense lines erupt in gunfire. Voss limps up behind them, wrapped in bandages but alive. Her voice is raw. They're coming. Hour 1. The first wave hits like a tidal surge. Hundreds of hybrids rush the outer trenches, shrieking in praise of their alien gods. Autoguns blaze, mortars thud, the bastion's walls flash with lasphire. Corda mans a heavy stubber emplacement, mowing down the front line until the barrel glows red. He smells scorched flesh and ozone. Voss shouts over the din, coordinating firing arcs. Hold the line, they breach, we're finished. Rusk's voice crackles over the Vox. Sector 7 collapsing, pull back to secondary wall. Corda rips the stubber from its mount and follows the retreat, firing bursts to cover the wounded. The creatures come in waves, clawed limbs flashing, teeth gnashing. He kicks one aside, bayonets another through the throat. The bastion trembles as an explosion rocks the lower gate. Dust cascades from the ceiling. Grenades, someone screams. Corda dives behind cover as the detonation tears through the wall. Dozens are flung aside. When the smoke clears, the breach is open, and the true horror emerges. The creature that steps through isn't a hybrid. It's towering, elongated, almost serpentine. Bioplasma drips from its maw. Its eyes burn with alien hunger. A Tyranid warrior leading the swarm. Voss fires her bolt pistol, each shot detonating chunks of its armor. It roars, smashing through the barricade with one arm. Fall back to the inner line, she orders. The soldiers obey, dragging the wounded. Corda and Rusk stay behind, setting demolition charges along the breach. Go, Rusk shouts. Corda hesitates, then sees the swarm closing in. He runs. Rusk stays. The blast detonates seconds later, collapsing the gate and burying the Tyranid under tons of rock and steel. Hour 0. The walls are silent again. The smoke settles. Corda sits amid the ruins, staring at the bodies, Imperial and alien alike, tangled in heaps across the courtyard. His armor is scorched, his face streaked with blood. He can barely lift his weapon. Voss limps toward him, her face pale but unbroken. Lieutenant Rusk. He shakes his head. She lowers her gaze. Then it's just us. The surviving defenders, maybe 50, gather around. The comms unit crackles faintly. A voice breaks through. "This is Imperial Navy Command. Orbital strike confirmed. All Imperial forces clear Bastion 3's blast zone immediately." Corda laughs weakly. "There's nowhere left to clear to." Voss looks at the horizon, where the upper hive burns like the surface of a dying sun. "Then we hold, to the last." Sister Ameline steps forward, placing her hand over her aquila pendant. "Then may our deaths buy the Emperor time." The survivors kneel. Corda feels something stir in his chest, not fear this time, but peace. For the first time since the war began, he understands. The Vox crackles one last time. "Orbital strike commencing in 5 minutes. Emperor be with you." The light outside grows blinding. The ground trembles. Corda grips his lasgun, standing shoulder to shoulder with the others. He looks to Voss. 13 hours, he says quietly. "We made it." She smiles faintly, almost. Then the sky falls. The siege no longer had a front. It was everywhere. Walls had turned to ash, lines had dissolved into maelstroms of debris and smoke. The hive city of Tarsis Magna no longer resembled a city at all. It was a carcass split open, its organs spilling fire. The banners of the Imperial Guard fluttered in tatters from melted rebar, and the air was thick enough with ash to choke the sun. You couldn't tell dawn from dusk anymore. It was all the same gray twilight. Corporal Aidan Holt stood beneath what had once been a Hab block elevator shaft, his Vox bead crackling with static as he checked the charge on his lasgun. The battery was at half, and there were no spares. Around him, the remnants of Second Company huddled behind Ferrocrete barricades and overturned transports. They had been fighting for so long that time had ceased to mean anything. Only the clock in Holt's head kept count. 6 hours left. That's what command said, though nobody knew what left truly meant anymore. Aidan turned his gaze toward the avenue beyond their line. It used to be a commercial corridor. Now it was a charnel house. Limbs protruded from rubble, corpses frozen mid-crawl, and half-melted servitors whined broken hymns to the Emperor as they dragged themselves through the ruin. And above it all, the thunder of macro shells from the upper hive came down like the hammer of judgment. Every blast tore another piece of the city away. Sergeant Vale limped over, her face smeared with soot, her right arm bound in blood-soaked cloth. She dropped down beside Aidan. "They're coming again," she muttered, voice raw. "How many?" "Too many." It was always too many. The sound reached them before the sight did, an insectal roar that swelled and echoed through the chasms of broken architecture. Not tyrannids this time. Human throats. Human rage. The cultists were coming again, wave after wave, dragging their twisted banners and screaming for blood. Aidan raised his lasgun. Around him, guardsmen did the same. Behind them, the Vox crackled with the voice of Captain Rhine. "Hold the avenue at all costs. Evac transport is on final descent. Repeat, hold at all costs." The order burned through them like a spark. The battered remnants of the Cadian 117th set their jaws, raised their rifles, and braced. The first silhouettes appeared through the smoke, masses of them, sprinting, screaming, firing crude auto guns from the hip. "Fire!" Vale shouted. The barricade lit up with a red storm. Las bolts cut through the dark, turning bodies to cinders, but more came. Always more. Aidan could feel the heat from his rifle, could smell the scorched air as the barrel overloaded. He switched to single fire, conserving what was left. A frag shell hit the barricade, sending Ferrocrete chunks flying. Holt's ears rang as he dropped behind cover. Private Leto next to him didn't move again. When the ringing cleared, Holt could hear the screaming again, closer. He looked up just in time to see a cultist leaping the barricade, blade raised high. Holt shot him point blank, the Las round burning a hole through the man's chest, but another followed. Sergeant Vale tackled the second one, her combat knife finding a home in his throat. They fell together, and Holt grabbed her by the shoulder, hauling her up. "On your feet, Sergeant." She coughed blood but smiled faintly, still breathing. The fight devolved into chaos, bayonets, rifles swung like clubs, boots stomping skulls into ash. Holt lost count of how many times he pulled the trigger. The cultists finally broke when the roar of the Valkyrie engines cut through the smog overhead. The gunship descended in a vortex of dust and shrapnel, its twin multi-lasers carving burning lines through the horde. The remaining cultists scattered into the ruins as the gunship's ramp dropped open. Captain Rhine's voice came again, strained. "All units fall back. Last evac is now." Holt and Vale exchanged a look. Neither moved right away. Around them, the survivors scrambled onto the Valkyrie, dozens reduced to maybe 15. Then came the sound, the deep, vibrating hum that didn't belong to gunfire or artillery. Holt turned toward the source and froze. The cultists weren't retreating. They were kneeling, all of them. Across the avenue, across the rubble, they had all dropped to their knees, hands raised toward the skyline. And through the haze, a figure was walking. Massive, clad in bronze and crimson armor carved with runes that shimmered faintly in the dim light. His face was hidden behind a helm shaped like a snarling beast, and from his back sprouted writhing, living cables that hissed and sparked. A champion of chaos. Holt's blood went cold. They kept moving. Each step took them deeper into darkness, away from the light of the burning hive above. But even down here, the echoes of war followed, the distant screams, the rumble of collapse, the faint, growing roar of something vast awakening below. And as the hours bled away, Holt began to understand that survival wasn't the point anymore. It was about meaning, about holding the line, even when there was no line left to hold. He gripped his rifle tighter, feeling the weight of it, the warmth of its worn handle. 5 hours, he murmured. Vale nodded grimly beside him. 5 hours to live. And the hive trembled again, louder this time. From somewhere below, something ancient and mechanical roared to life. The earth itself began to move. The hive was falling. You could hear it, feel it. The very bones of Tarsi's Magna were cracking under their own weight. Whole districts slid down into the abyss where the reactor once burned bright, now a molten wound consuming the planet from within. What had begun as a war for control had become a countdown to extinction. Aiden Holt moved through the darkness, lasgun low, breath shallow. Every sound echoed too long in the tunnels now, the groan of twisted steel, the hiss of vapor leaks, the dull, rhythmic thud of collapsing infrastructure far above. The air was hot enough to sear your throat, and every breath tasted of oil and ash. Sergeant Vale walked beside him, limping worse than before. Her wound had opened again during the last collapse, blood soaking through the bandages she'd torn from her sleeve. She said nothing about it. She just kept moving. Behind them followed what was left of Second Company, 7 soldiers from the hundreds that had once marched through the gates of Tarsi's Magna. Holt glanced back once and saw their faces, hollow eyes, ash-streaked skin, expressions caught between numbness and grim resolve. None spoke. They all knew. "Command-S gone silent," Vale said after a long time. Her voice rasped like metal scraping stone. "No response from Upper Hive. Vox is dead." "Then we're on our own," Holt said. "We've been on our own for a while." The tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, an ancient sub-transit hub long abandoned, its train lines now buried under rock and wreckage. The glow from the molten fissures illuminated twisted pillars and shattered rails. Signs written in faded high Gothic still hung from the ceiling, pointing to places that no longer existed. They moved carefully across the chamber. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of heavy movement echoed, slow, deliberate, metallic. Holt stopped and raised a hand. The others froze. "Sentinel?" Vale asked softly. He shook his head. The sound was wrong, too heavy, too purposeful. Then came the light. A thin red beam swept across the chamber, slicing through the haze. It passed over their position, lingered, then locked on. Cover, Holt shouted. Bolts of searing plasma erupted from the shadows, exploding across the ferrocrete. 2 guardsmen fell instantly, their bodies vaporized where they stood. Holt dove behind a collapsed column, returning fire into the dark. The thing stepped into view, a hulking silhouette of black iron and bone, its limbs fused with machinery, its face a twisted parody of humanity. A corrupted servitor, perhaps once imperial, now desecrated by chaos. Tubes pulsed with glowing ichor across its frame. It raised a cannon grafted into its arm and fired again, lighting the chamber with hellish brilliance. Vale barked orders between bursts. Left flank move, take cover near the tram line. Holt's shots scored its armor but did little else. Then he spotted it, a bundle of grenades on the corpse of a fallen guardsman. He crawled, dragging himself across the ground as plasma bolts scorched the floor inches from his head. He reached the body, ripped free the grenades, primed one, and hurled it toward the servitor. The explosion ripped through its lower half, sending shards of metal raining down. The machine reeled, howling a metallic shriek that shook the walls. Vale stood, raised her rifle, and put a bolt through its head. The servitor fell, still twitching, smoke rising from the ruined core. Silence returned, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal. "Good throw," Vale muttered, lowering her rifle. Holt nodded, catching his breath. "We need to keep moving before more come." They pushed deeper into the tunnels, climbing down ladders that led into maintenance shafts untouched for centuries. The air grew hotter the farther they descended. The light from the fissures below painted everything in shades of crimson and gold, as if the planet's blood was seeping upward. After another half-hour, they reached a narrow corridor marked with hazard runes. Reactor access level 3B restricted. The lettering had melted in places, but the path beyond still stood intact. Vale wiped the sweat from her brow. "This leads toward the under-reactor conduits. If we can get below the breach zone, maybe we can find shelter." Holt gave a short, grim laugh. "Shelter from a dying world." She met his eyes, shelter long enough to matter. They entered the passage. It wound downward, steeper and narrower, until they emerged into a cavern that glowed with impossible light. Below them stretched the heart of the Hive, vast chasms filled with molten machinery, collapsing walkways, and half-functioning servitor arms still performing meaningless tasks as they melted. And in the center of it all stood the reactor itself, cracked open like an egg, its containment fields flickering wildly. Columns of plasma vented skyward in bursts that lit the entire cavern. The scale of it was beyond comprehension. "Emperor, save us," whispered one of the soldiers behind them. Vale pointed toward a maintenance platform suspended above the void. "That's our path. We move fast." The platform groaned under their weight as they crossed. Heat shimmered around them, distorting the air. Holt could feel his skin blistering beneath his armor. Every breath burned. The sound of the collapsing Hive was a constant, distant thunder above their heads. They reached the far end just as another tremor shook the platform. A massive section of ceiling collapsed behind them, sealing the way they came. Holt turned and saw it, a wave of molten debris cascading down like liquid fire. "Go, go," Vale shouted. They sprinted across the final bridge section, diving through a half-open blast door just as the inferno consumed the path. The door sealed automatically behind them, locking with a deep thud. For a moment, silence. Then Holt heard it again, the sound of footsteps, not metal this time, boots, human. He raised his rifle. "Identify yourself." A voice answered from the dark. "Stand down, soldier. You're among allies." Out of the shadows stepped a man in battered officer's armor, a cracked aquila still painted across his chest plate. His left eye was replaced by a crude bionic. Behind him came 4 others, each bearing the same insignia, Tarsi's Defense Command. Vale stepped forward. "Captain Rhine." The man nodded slowly. "The same." Holt felt his chest tighten. We thought you were dead. Not yet, Ryan said, but death's catching up fast. He looked them over, eyes lingering on Vale's wound. You've done well to make it this far, most didn't. Vale glanced around the small chamber. What's left of command? Ryan's jaw hardened. You're looking at it. He gestured toward a hollow table flickering with a broken projection of the hive. The map was red from top to bottom. Orbital commands gone. Surface commands gone. All upper levels are lost. Reactor breach will consume the lower city in under 3 hours. Holt swallowed hard. Is there any way off this rock? There was. Ryan's tone was flat. Extraction vessels were withdrawn an hour ago. They couldn't break through the debris field. No help is coming. Silence fell. Even the air seemed to still. Vale finally spoke. Then what's the plan? Ryan looked at her, then at the flickering map. There's a munitions depot in the core sector. If we can reach it, we can detonate the charges manually. Bring the entire hive down in one controlled collapse. Better it dies quickly than slowly. Holt stared at him. That'll kill everyone still inside. There's no one left to kill, Ryan said quietly. Just us and them. He turned toward the others, his expression carved from iron. You have 3 hours to make your peace and your mark. Then we end it. The plan was madness, but it was purpose. After endless days of slaughter, confusion, and loss, purpose was the one thing left that felt real. Holt saw it in the eyes of the others too. They were tired of running. Vale stepped forward. Then we do it. Ryan nodded once. Move out. The journey to the core sector was a nightmare of smoke, fire, and falling debris. They navigated collapsing bridges, fought off straggling cultists driven mad by the warp-tainted air, and crossed rivers of molten metal using half-melted girders. Every step forward cost them something. At one point, a section of tunnel gave way beneath them. 2 soldiers fell into the fire before anyone could react. Their screams were brief. By the time they reached the munitions depot, only 5 of them remained. The depot was a vast cathedral of war, stacks of shells, fuel drums, and promethium tanks stretching into the distance. The air shimmered with heat. The control terminal blinked faintly at the center, its interface cracked but functional. Ryan approached it, typing in the override codes with shaking hands. We'll set the charges to detonate in 3 hours. That'll give us enough time to reach the sublift and seal ourselves in before the end. Vale frowned. And if the lift's gone? Then we stay. No one argued. Holt helped link the detonator cables, his gloves melting against the heat. Sweat dripped into his eyes. Every breath hurt. But he kept working, because the work was all that was left. When they finished, Ryan placed his hand on the main detonator and looked around. If anyone wants to pray, now's the time. Vale bowed her head. Holt did the same. In that burning hall amid weapons of war, they spoke no words, only silence. The kind of silence that meant surrender, not defeat. Then Ryan activated the sequence. A klaxon began to wail. Red lights strobed across the depot. On the terminal, a single line of text blinked. Core detonation armed 2 hours, 59 minutes. Ryan turned to them. Let's go home. They left the depot behind, following the trembling tunnels toward the sublift. As they walked, the air shook with distant explosions. The hive above was tearing itself apart. At one point, Holt looked back. He could see the faint glow from the depot behind them, pulsing like a heartbeat. The end was coming, and he felt no fear anymore, only weight. Vale stumbled beside him, and he caught her before she fell. Her lips were pale, her breathing shallow. "You need rest," he said. "No time for that," she smiled faintly. 3 hours to live, remember." He managed a small, hollow laugh. "Yeah." They kept walking. Behind them, the world burned brighter. The hive was no longer dying. It was already dead. Every tremor, every scream, Every flare of molten light was the twitch of a corpse that didn't yet know it had fallen. What had once been Tarsi's Magna, the proud industrial jewel of the Segmentum Solar, was now an open wound across the crust of its world, bleeding light and fire into the void. Inside the labyrinthine underworks, the last survivors of the Cadian 117th trudged through collapsing corridors, following the pulsing hum of the sublift beacon that flickered faintly through the ash-dark air. The clock was ticking louder than the bombardment overhead. 1 hour. 1 hour until the Hive detonated. 1 hour until everything they'd fought for, bled for, believed in, was turned to dust. Corporal Aidan Holt led the way, his face streaked with soot, his hands raw from dragging himself through molten debris and twisted rebar. The strap of his lasgun had melted to the armor on his shoulder. He didn't care. Pain had become a background noise long ago. Behind him limped Sergeant Vale, her once steady stride now faltering with every step. Her uniform was soaked through with blood from a wound that refused to close, yet her eyes still burned with purpose, unyielding, unbroken. Captain Rhine followed last, cradling the detonator unit like a holy relic. Every few minutes he glanced down at the flickering chronal strapped to his wrist. 58 minutes, 57, 56. They turned a corner and came face to face with a sight that froze them all in place. The corridor ahead had collapsed entirely, replaced by a yawning abyss where molten light surged up from the planet's core. The remains of a transit bridge hung precariously over the gap, its support beams groaning and dripping molten steel. Beyond it they could see the sublift platform, faintly illuminated by emergency lights. It wasn't far, maybe 50 meters, but the bridge between was a ruin. Vale looked across the gap, her breath shallow. "If that goes," she said quietly, "so do we." Rhine checked the readings. "We don't have a choice. The only other route collapsed 3 clicks back." Holt stepped forward, testing the first section. It held, though it sagged ominously beneath his weight. He nodded to the others. "We go one at a time, slow and steady." Vale went next, followed by Rhine. The molten light below bathed them in an unholy glow, and every sound, the groan of the bridge, the creak of their boots, the distant roar of the dying Hive, echoed like a cathedral's dirge. Halfway across, another tremor struck. The bridge lurched violently. Holt dropped to one knee, gripping a beam to steady himself. Metal screamed as a section behind Rhine gave way, tumbling into the fire below. Vale gasped as a loose cable whipped past her face. "Keep moving," Holt shouted over the din. They ran the last few meters, diving onto the platform just as the bridge behind them collapsed completely, vanishing into the molten river. For a long moment, no one spoke. They just lay there, breathing, the silence broken only by the endless groaning of the Hive's death throes. Then the sublift doors hissed open. A gust of stale, cold air swept out, carrying the faint scent of oil and ozone. The lift was enormous, large enough to hold a dozen tanks, but now it was just a hollow shell of rusting metal and broken light fixtures. Rhine stumbled inside and set the detonator unit on the control panel. "Once this lift seals," he said, "we'll be protected from the blast, at least long enough to see it through." Holt nodded, assuming it still works. Vale leaned against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor. "If it doesn't, we'll know soon enough." Rhine activated the console. The lift shuddered, gears grinding, ancient pistons whining as it began its descent. The sound was deafening, but it was the sweetest sound Holt had heard in weeks. He sat opposite Vale. Her head rested against the wall, her eyes half open. "You still with me, Sergeant?" She smiled faintly. "Barely, but dying underground with you lot beats bleeding out up top." "Don't talk like that." "I'm not afraid, Holt. I just want to know it mattered. That all this," she gestured weakly at the shaking metal around them, "meant something." "It did," Holt said quietly. "It has to." The lift continued downward, deeper and deeper into the planet's crust. The heat faded. The sound of the surface bombardment grew distant. For a while, it almost felt peaceful. But peace never lasted on Tarsi's Magna. At exactly 34 minutes to detonation, the lift ground to a halt. Warning runes flashed across the console. Motion jam, track obstruction detected. Ryan slammed his fist against the panel. No, 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 no. Holt moved to the edge and peered through the metal grating of the lower deck. The shaft below was a maze of collapsed girders and debris. Something wedged in the rails. "Can we clear it?" Vale asked. "Maybe," Holt said, "if we climb down." Ryan's jaw tightened. "We're out of time for maybe. Do it." Holt hooked a line to the railing and began his descent. The air below was thick and stifling, every breath laced with metal dust. He moved carefully, lowering himself until he reached the blockage, a tangle of steel beams fused together by heat. As he examined it, a sound echoed from the dark below, slow, rhythmic. Footsteps. He froze. Then from the shadows beneath the lift, a figure emerged. It was enormous, taller than a man, its armor blackened and fused, its movements impossibly slow yet deliberate. A face of bone stared up through the gloom. The Chaos Champion. Holt's heart stopped. The monster had survived the bombardment, survived the collapse, survived everything. Now it climbed toward them, dragging its molten blade against the wall, sparks falling like rain. Holt's hands trembled as he reached for his Vox. "Captain, he's here." Ryan's voice came through tight. "Who?" "The champion, the one from the avenue. He's below us." A silence followed. Then Ryan said, "Get back up now." Holt started climbing, his muscles screaming as he pulled himself upward. The sound of metal being torn apart filled the shaft below. The champion was climbing fast, gouging handholds into the wall with his claws. He reached the top just as the lift's floor shuddered violently. Vale's eyes widened as she saw the shape emerging beneath them, molten blade first. "Emperor, help us," she whispered. Ryan didn't hesitate. He grabbed the detonator and shoved it into Holt's hands. "You know what to do." "What?" Holt said, breathless. Ryan turned, drawing his sidearm. "Get her to the secondary shaft. Keep moving. That's an order." Then he jumped. Before Holt could protest, Ryan dropped through the hatch, landing on the platform below just as the champion tore through the lift's floor. The two collided in a blur of sparks and metal. The sound was monstrous, blade against steel, bone against fury. "Captain," Holt shouted. Vale grabbed his arm. "He knew this was coming. We can't waste it." The lift shook again. Pieces of the ceiling began to fall. Holt forced himself to move, dragging Vale toward the secondary hatch. She stumbled, coughing blood, but didn't stop. Behind them, the last sounds of Ryan's defiance echoed. Gunfire, roars, then silence. They reached the hatch and dropped into a narrow maintenance conduit just as the lift above exploded. The blast of heat knocked Holt forward, and for a moment everything was sound and fire. When he came to, Vale was beside him, barely conscious. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes were open. "You've got the detonator," she murmured. He nodded, checking it. The screen was cracked, but the timer still blinked. 00:1937. 19 minutes. They crawled through the conduit, following the flickering emergency lights until they reached a small observation deck overlooking the reactor chasm. From here, they could see the heart of the Hive, a vast wound glowing with raw energy. Vale sank to her knees, staring out over the molten expanse. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Holt knelt beside her. "You need to rest." "I'm not going anywhere," she smiled weakly. "End it, Holt. Do what Ryan died for." He looked down at the detonator, thumb hovering over the final key. "I can't leave you here." "You already know I'm done. Don't make it meaningless." The chasm rumbled, Debris rained from above. Holt's eyes burned. He wanted to scream, but there was no air left for it. He placed the detonator beside her, knelt, and pressed his forehead to hers. "For Cadia," he whispered. "For the Emperor," she breathed. He stood, raised his weapon one last time, and looked out over the dying hive. The molten light flickered across his armor. The chrono ticked down, 0002:14. Vale's voice was soft behind him. "Do it." He pressed the key. The world held its breath. Then came the light. A blinding, pure, all-consuming light that rose from the depths like dawn. The ground split, the air ignited, and the hive that had stood for 10,000 years turned into a pillar of flame visible from orbit. The explosion raced upward through the city's veins, devouring towers, spires, cathedrals, and manufactoria in a single, unstoppable surge. The screams were drowned in the roar. And in that final moment, just before everything ended, Aiden Holt thought he saw something in the fire. Not horror, not defeat, but peace. The war was over. When Imperial reinforcements arrived weeks later, they found nothing but glass and ash where Tarsi's Magna had once stood. No signals, no survivors, only a crater the size of a continent, still burning faintly beneath the starlight. In the records of the Astra Militarum, the official report listed the hive as lost with honors. The names of the fallen were etched into the remembrance walls of Cadia's successor worlds. Among them, Captain Reese Rhine, Sergeant Lyra Vale, Corporal Aiden Holt. 3 names among millions. 3 souls who bought the Imperium one more sunrise.